After my husband passed away, I was overwhelmed by grief and longing. One day, I picked up the German journal he used to write in so often in front of me. I brought it to my granddaughter, who had just returned from studying in Germany, and asked her to read it for me. To my surprise, she chuckled and said, "Grandpa was so romantic. He even wrote you love letters." She flipped through the pages. Every entry starts with, "My dearest Hannah." I felt as though lightning had struck me. All those years we spent together. It had all been a lie. He never once wrote my name. Instead, his first love's name, Hannah, filled every page of his journal. Entry after entry. He wrote about his longing for her, how he never truly got over her. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in time, shortly after we were married. This time I knew I couldn't go on pretending. I wouldn't endure his cold silence, his emotional neglect, or the way he treated me like an afterthought. I looked up at the stark white ceiling, the bright light above me almost painful. I shifted slightly, and the man beside me stirred. David turned over in his sleep. He was still in his early 20s, with that youthful charm that had once captivated me. He was undeniably handsome, but now I knew. Handsome men often have the coldest hearts. He frowned slightly as he felt my gaze, his expression impatient. That familiar look sent a chill through me, bringing back memories of countless mornings filled with silence or sharp, cutting words. I glanced at the calendar on the nightstand. June 12, 1988. We had been married for just 3 years. Gripping the edge of the bed, I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. My body felt weak, but I tried to steady myself. David mumbled something in his sleep and shifted again. Took a breath. "David," I murmured, my voice almost pleading. "I think my gastritis is acting up again. Can you take me to the hospital?" He paused for a moment but then resumed fixing his shirt in front of the mirror, as though he hadn't heard me. Before we got married, his refined, scholarly demeanor had drawn me in. Now it felt like a cruel joke. Finally he spoke without looking at me. "I have plans. Go by yourself." I watched him head toward the door, knowing exactly where he was going. Hannah's wedding. Just like he had done years ago when he left me at our own wedding to attend her graduation. "David," I called out again, my voice barely more than a whisper. He turned, eyes cold and impatient, as if asking, "What now?" To him, I had always been nothing more than a convenient wife, a placeholder to satisfy his family's expectations. In the 3 years we had been married, he had barely touched me. The most intimate moment we shared was the perfunctory kiss he planted on my forehead the day we registered our marriage. Cold sweat trickled down my back. I was in pain, but he either couldn't see it or refused to. He smirked dismissively and walked out. I knew he didn't care. He never had. My struggles, my feelings, they were always insignificant to him. Summoning all my strength, I crawled out of bed. My stomach churned violently, my vision blurred, but I forced myself to get to the hospital. The doctor said my acute gastritis was caused by prolonged stress and irregular eating habits. I needed to be hospitalized for a few days for observation. Lying on the hospital bed, I stared at the sky outside the window, my mind racing. Was this really my life? Was I destined to live in the same haze of misery as before? Well, not this time. I had been given a second chance, and I was determined to live for myself. When I returned home, David wasn't back yet. A note lay on the table, written in his messy handwriting. "My mom wants dumplings tonight. Be sure to come home early to make dinner." I let out a cold laugh, crumpled the note into a ball, and tossed it into the trash. Then I opened the wardrobe and pulled out the red dress I had been saving for years. I had bought it with money I secretly saved while David was on a business trip. I had always wanted to wear it for him, but I never had the courage. Standing in front of the mirror, I gathered my hair into a high bun, exposing the elegant curve of my neck. I picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Hello, is this Miss Wong?" "It's me, Laura. I've made up my mind. I want to return to the troupe." After hanging up, I gazed at my reflection in the mirror. A confident smile curled at the corners of my lips. By evening, David returned home. He looked surprised, maybe even confused, as he noticed I hadn't rushed to greet him at the door like I usually did, offering slippers and a cup of tea. Instead, I sat calmly in the living room, holding a cup of tea. My tone was steady. "Let's go to the civil affairs office tomorrow." A flash of surprise, maybe even admiration, crossed his eyes as he took in my appearance, but it was gone in an instant. "What? You want to get a divorce?" He nodded. "Yes." The moment those words left my mouth, I felt as though a heavy stone that had been weighing on my chest for years had finally been lifted. I could breathe freely again. He looked at me, a faint trace of mockery in his tone. "Do you even know what you're saying?" "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, meeting his gaze head-on. "I want a divorce." He ignored me, poured himself a glass of water and said, "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" I replied coldly, "Once we're divorced, you can go find your Hannah any time you like. I won't stand in your way." "What nonsense are you talking about?" He frowned impatiently. "Just hurry up and make me something to eat." "David," I said, my voice trembling with emotion, "if you love Hannah so much, why didn't you fight against the pressure and marry her in the first place? Why won't you let me go now?" "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his gaze darting away, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know." I let out a bitter laugh, tears streaming down my face. "David, ask yourself honestly. Have you ever treated me fairly all these years? What do you take me for?" I stood up, my voice rising as years of pent-up resentment and anguish spilled out. 3 years of marriage. How many times have you touched me? How many times have you cared about me? In your eyes and in your heart, is there anyone besides your first love, Hannah? You even wrote love letters to her in your journal, right in front of me. What do you take me for, David? His face paled. How did you know about that? How could I not know? I laughed bitterly. Did you really think I couldn't feel it? Did you really think I was completely oblivious? I looked at him, my eyes filled with disappointment and sorrow. David, you're nothing but a coward. You didn't have the courage to stand up to your parents. You didn't have the courage to pursue your so-called true love. And yet, you turned to emotional infidelity within our marriage to escape reality. You're a coward through and through. Enough, Laura. Don't push it too far, he yelled, his voice echoing in the empty room. You want a divorce. Fine. Let's do it tomorrow. We'll go, he said, his voice hard again. His shouting reverberated, but my heart was numb. I stared at him, my gaze calm. All right, I said simply, before turning and walking into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. At dawn I opened my eyes. The space beside me was already empty. As I expected, David had left without a word, avoiding the situation entirely. I let out a bitter laugh. I wasn't sure how I felt, hurt, relieved, or maybe both. I decided to visit the city's dance troupe. Before marriage, I had been one of their star performers. Many people said I was born to dance. But for the sake of this marriage, I had given up my career on the stage I loved, dedicating myself entirely to him and this home. When Miss Wong, the troupe's manager, saw me, her eyes lit up. She quickly pulled me to sit on the sofa. Laura, you're finally here. I thought you were too proud to come back. She laughed as she peeled an orange. I took the orange from her and smiled faintly. How could that be, Miss Wong? Thank you for thinking of me. Noticing my subdued mood, Miss Wong grew serious. Laura, I don't know what's going on with you, but life goes on. A woman needs to have her own career, don't you think? He nodded. She was right. I couldn't spend this life stumbling around aimlessly as I had before. Don't worry, if you're ready to return, your position is still here for you, she assured me. We're preparing to stage a new dance drama. If you're interested, you can take a look at the script first. She handed me a thick script from a drawer. I flipped through a few pages. It was a love story adapted from a folk tale, and I immediately found myself intrigued. "What do you think? Do you like it?" Miss Wong asked. He nodded. "I like it very much. Thank you, Miss Wong." "Great. Take your time reading the script. We can discuss any ideas you have later." She patted my hand encouragingly. "I believe in you, Laura. You can do this." Holding the script, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in a long time. Yes, I still had dreams. My life was still full of possibilities. I wouldn't let myself be defeated so easily. I spent the whole day at the dance troupe, and my mood lifted significantly. When I returned home that evening, the house was empty and lifeless. I made a simple bowl of noodles and ate while lost in thought. Suddenly, there was a loud, urgent knock at the door. "Who is it?" I asked, walking to open it. "It's me, Laura. You need to go to the hospital right away. Something's happened to David," said Mrs. Reed, my nosy neighbor from upstairs. She looked both alarmed and slightly smug. "Don't scare me, Mrs. Reed. What's going on?" "How could I scare you?" she said with an exaggerated wave of her hand. "I saw it with my own eyes. David was carried out of the motel covered in blood. It was terrifying. You should go see for yourself." With that, she darted away, clearly afraid I'd ask more questions. I didn't waste time thinking it over. Grabbing a jacket, I rushed out the door and headed for the hospital. When I finally arrived, I saw David lying in a hospital bed. His face was bruised and swollen, as if he'd been beaten severely. Sitting by his side, tears streaming down her face, was Hannah. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked so pitiful that anyone who saw her might have felt sorry for her. "David, how are you? Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine, just a scratch," he replied weakly, forcing a faint smile. He reached out and held Hannah's hand. "Hannah, don't worry about me." Standing at the doorway, I watched the scene before me, feeling nothing but bitter irony. "Laura, you're here." Hannah finally noticed me and greeted me with an air of forced politeness. Her voice, soft and demure, was laced with fake innocence. David noticed me too. His eyes flickered briefly, but he didn't say a word. "What happened to you, David?" I asked, my tone neutral. Before he could answer, Hannah began sobbing again. "Laura, don't blame David. It's all my fault. I was supposed to fly back to Germany today, and David was just seeing me off. My husband misunderstood, and this happened." I let out a cold laugh. "Seeing someone off requires a motel room." Hannah's face turned pale. She bit her lip and fell silent. "David," I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion, "let's get a divorce." Hannah's head shot up at my words, a glimmer of hope flashing in her eyes. She suddenly dropped to her knees in front of me, clutching my hands and sobbing. "Laura, please don't get a divorce. I know you're upset, but it was just a mistake. David still cares about you. He was just confused for a moment." Her act stirred nothing in me but disgust. After all these years, she was still playing the same fragile, innocent victim, like every problem was someone else's fault and she was always the one being wronged. David struggled to sit up, looking genuinely distressed as he reached out to comfort her. "Hannah, stop this. Get up, the floor is cold." It was the first time I'd seen him show such tenderness toward a woman. And that woman wasn't me. I let out a cold laugh. "What is this, a melodrama? Two married people embracing like this in a hospital room?" David snapped. "Laura, enough. Haven't you caused enough trouble? Do you really have to be so relentless?" I stared at him coldly and enunciated each word. "Tell me, what part of what I said isn't true?" Then I added, "If you don't come to the Civil Affairs office tomorrow to finalize the divorce, I'll go straight to the newspapers. Let's see how the world reacts to the two of you." Hannah burst into even louder sobs, clutching David's arm desperately. Her words a garbled mess. David's face darkened. He had always been obsessed with his reputation. If this turned into a public scandal, his career as a university professor would be over. He finally muttered, "Fine. I'll do it." His voice was strained. I nodded in satisfaction and turned to leave the hospital room without another word. Back home, I began packing my belongings, preparing to move into the dorm at the dance troupe the next day. This apartment was faculty housing assigned to David by the university. I had no intention of keeping it. It wasn't something I had paid for, and it held no value to me anymore. There weren't many valuable items in the house. Over the years, David had only given me a small allowance each month, most of which I had to scrimp and save to send to his mother. There had never been any chance for me to build up any real savings. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked around the now empty room, and a wave of sorrow swept over me. I had given everything I had to this home, only to end up with nothing in return. I had foolishly believed that if I treated him well enough, he would eventually be moved. But I was wrong. Some hearts are like stone. No amount of warmth can soften them. I stuffed a few simple clothes and necessities into a suitcase. Everything else, I decided, would stay behind for David and his true love. Once I was done packing, I sat in the now barren room and felt an unexpected sense of relief. After so many years, I was finally breaking free from this dreadful marriage. The next morning I went to the civil affairs office. David was already there, waiting. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his face, as though he had aged 10 years overnight. When he saw me, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but ultimately said nothing. The divorce process went smoothly. In less than 30 minutes, we were handed our divorce certificates. As we walked out of the office, David called out, "Laura, do you really want this?" I interrupted him without turning back. "It's over, David. Everything is over. From now on, we're strangers." The dorm was modest, just a bed, a table, and a chair, but I was content. Determined to regain my best form as quickly as possible, I worked harder than everyone else. Even while resting, I stretched to maintain flexibility. Basic skills were critical, and although I hadn't completely lost them during my 3 years of marriage, I was still a bit rusty. One day, as Miss Wong helped adjust my stage headpiece, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Laura, are you sure about this? About being divorced?" I glanced at my reflection in the mirror and smiled faintly. My appearance hadn't changed much. My foundation was still strong, but years of hardship had left me looking worn out. Oddly enough, now that I was divorced, I seemed to glow with a newfound radiance. "Don't worry about me, Miss Wong," I said calmly. "I know what I'm doing." She sighed but didn't press further. As I fastened the buttons on my practice uniform in front of the mirror, someone called from outside the room. "Laura, someone's looking for you downstairs." Hardly anyone ever came to see me here. I went downstairs and saw David standing there. He wore a wrinkled shirt and looked even more disheveled than before, a shadow of the impeccably dressed university professor he once was. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. He lowered his head, his voice subdued. "Do you want me to give you the family savings?" David's words made me laugh out of sheer disbelief. "David," I said, "you've got some nerve asking me for money. What savings? All these years, every penny I saved went toward buying supplements for your mom and gifts for your precious first love." David's face darkened. "Laura, how can you say that? That money was rightfully my mom's. And Hannah, she hasn't been well and needed care." I nearly laughed out loud at how shameless he sounded, so self-righteous. I pulled a ledger from my bag and tossed it in front of him. "See for yourself. Every single expense for this house over the years is written in there." David flipped through the pages, his face growing grimmer with every line. "See it clearly, Professor David," I said with a cold smile. "If there's nothing else, don't bother me again." He closed the ledger, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. "Laura, we were husband and wife after all." I interrupted sharply. "Enough, David. Let us part ways amicably. Don't come looking for me again." He hesitated before asking awkwardly, "Laura, how do you keep white shirts from yellowing? And what about ironing? What's the best way to do it?" I froze for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. This was the same Professor David who had never lifted a finger in the house, now coming to me for household advice. "Ask your mom," I replied coldly. "She's the expert." With that, I turned and walked away. In the days that followed, David seemed like a changed man. He started showing up at the dance troupe every few days, asking me trivial questions. "Laura, if I use too much soy sauce, will the dish be too salty? Laura, how do you clean water stains off the floor? Laura, I noticed one of my shirt buttons came loose. Could you sew it back on for me?" I rolled my eyes. "Go ask your Hannah. She doesn't know how to do these things." "Then why should I help you?" David had no reply to that. Left speechless, I continued. "Let me make this clear. David, I'm not some saint with infinite patience to feel sorry for you. If you're going to live your life, then live it. Don't bother me." Despite my words, he kept complaining. First about how Hannah couldn't cook, then about how she couldn't clean, like he was the world's most pitiful victim. I got so sick of hearing it that I told the security guard not to let him in anymore. Finally, peace returned to my life. Every day, I trained until my legs ached, sweat soaking through my clothes. But as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, growing lighter and more graceful with each passing day, I felt a surge of strength. I was like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon, greedily soaking in the sunlight and rain, yearning to shine brightly on stage. The day of the performance finally arrived. With meticulous makeup and a stunning costume, I twirled and leaped under the spotlight, pouring all my emotions into every move. It was a farewell to past pain and a hopeful embrace of the future. As the curtain fell, thunderous applause erupted from the audience, echoing endlessly in the crowd. And there, standing among the spectators, I spotted David. He stood there, his expression complicated, holding a bouquet of flowers. There he stood, David, the man who had once made me feel invisible, now holding a bouquet of white lilies, the kind I used to keep in our bedroom before I left. He looked lost, almost like a stranger in his own skin. The sharp lines of his once confident posture had softened, replaced by something uncertain, almost fragile. I didn't walk up to him. I didn't need to. The applause still echoed in my ears. The lights still shimmered in my vision. I had just danced the most important performance of my life. Not for an audience, not for a role, but for myself. Rebirth. Miss Wong came up beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You were amazing," she said softly. I nodded, my eyes never leaving David. He finally stepped forward, holding out the bouquet. "I just wanted to say, congratulations," he said. His voice low and rough with something that might have been regret. "You were incredible out there." I took the flowers, not because I wanted to accept anything from him, but because they were a symbol of closure, of growth, of the fact that I had become someone even he couldn't ignore. "Thank you," I said simply. "But you're too late." He looked at me then, not with the cold detachment of a husband who never loved me, not with the guilt of a man who had betrayed me, but with the quiet awe of someone realizing what they lost. Not because I was his, but because I had become someone he could never reach. I turned away, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. He wasn't the villain of my story anymore. He was just a chapter one had closed. Backstage, I looked in the mirror one last time. My makeup was smudged, my hair damp with sweat, but my eyes were alive, brighter than they had been in years. I had danced my pain away, and in its place, I found something I had forgotten. Myself. And as I stepped out into the night, the city lights glowing around me like stars fallen to earth, I knew I was finally free. Not because of him. Not because of anyone. But because I had chosen to rise.